My name's Scott Ray. I'm Dean of Faculty at Talbot School of Theology here at Biola University and Professor of Christian Ethics. I also teach in the Crowell School of Business, a course in business ethics, with my colleague, Professor Tom Wilson.
Hi, I'm Professor Tom Wilson. In the Crowell School of Business, I'm an associate professor teaching human resource management, business law, and organizational ethics with Dr. Ray. And before that, I was a trial attorney for a little over 30 years before I came to Biola. So that's the perspective that I bring today.
Hey, our point of discussion today is the Hobby Lobby legal case, which the United States Supreme Court will be giving a verdict here in a few days. And we wanted to say a little bit about the perspective from a Christian institution about that decision. So, Tom, I know in a recent blog post you outlined a lot of the details of this case. Can you, for those of our listeners who are not familiar with the facts, could you reiterate basically what's at issue and sort of your thoughts as a trial lawyer on what's going on in this case?
Sure. Hobby Lobby is a for-profit organization, pretty good sized. They have about 500 or more craft stores nationwide. They are family owned by the Green family, who are very outspoken Christians. Hobby Lobby presents itself as a Christian company. They're very outspoken about that too in terms of the values that they stand for, which are published values, even to the point where you'll hear Christian music played through their stores when you're there. The case is about the Affordable Care Act, which is sometimes referred to as Obamacare, and its requirement that abortion-inducing drugs must be included in the pharmaceuticals that are made available through the medical plan for the company. Hobby Lobby has objected to doing that on the basis of exercising their religious freedom to do so, saying that they do not want to be a part of providing any drug that will cause death prior to birth of the fetus. So in terms of, from a legal perspective, there really are two acts involved. One's the Affordable Care Act, which we just discussed. The other is the what's called RFRA, the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, which basically says that the government has the right to interfere with someone's living out their religious beliefs as long as two things are present. There has to be a compelling state interest, and they have to use the least restrictive means possible, the government does, if they're going to restrict someone's right to express themselves in terms of their religion. A sub-issue in the case is about corporations, and this always conjures up a lot of debate as to whether a corporation is really a person. And from a legal perspective, they are and they're not. For some things, a corporation is considered a person. For other things, they're not. A corporation, for instance, cannot exercise the Fifth Amendment privilege against self-incrimination. It has no Fourth Amendment right of privacy. So basically the government's position is that individuals are free to rely on the RFRA to state their religious beliefs and stand by their religious beliefs, but corporation entities are not. So that's where they draw the line.
Okay, and the distinction between Hobby Lobby being a private organization as opposed to a publicly traded company, you think is important here?
I do. If you're a publicly traded company, as you and I have discussed in class from time to time, sometimes people forget that if you take your company public, you no longer own it. The public owns your company. So before the Greens could express themselves in terms of their freedom of religion, they would no longer be owners if it were a public company. And I think the government would make a distinction, and probably a winning distinction from a legal perspective, that if you've taken the company public, you don't have the right to exercise your freedom of religion through the company anymore. But because it's private, basically the Greens' position is we could exercise this right as individuals. The fact that we're doing business in some form shouldn't change that.
So as Hobby Lobby is a private company, would you say that the company is an extension of the owners?
I would.
Something like that?
I would. I think that's probably one of their very best arguments, and one of the arguments they did make to the Supreme Court is basically that the distinction between an individual and an individually owned company is a meaningless one in terms of expressing religious beliefs.
We would say a distinction without a difference.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, so what the Affordable Care Act requires is for companies that are above a certain number of employees
50.
to provide a whole, a whole menu of contraceptive and abortifacient pharmaceuticals.
Correct.
Otherwise, if you don't provide those, you're in violation of the standards of the Affordable Care Act. What Hobby Lobby is arguing is that to provide those drugs violates their right to practice their own religious freedom.
Correct. Correct.
I think what I would add to that is that the Greens have been really clear that their religious views are what are the basis for their view of the sanctity of life and the dignity of human persons beginning at conception.
Correct.
And so they don't object, as far as I know, they don't object morally or on religious grounds to lots of contraceptives that would be provided. But it's specifically there's two of them, what's called Plan B and then what are called Ella drugs, both of which are abortifacient, which either prevent fertilized eggs or embryos from implanting in the womb or actually expel them.
That's correct.
After already been implanted.
Yeah.
So they would be abortion producing as opposed to most of the other contraceptives that they provide being genuinely contraceptive in that they prevent conception.
No, you're right, and that's an important distinction. In fact, Hobby Lobby agreed to 16 of the 20 drugs that were required under ACA.
So I think the point of that is that it's misrepresenting the case to say that Hobby Lobby did not want to provide contraception for their employees. It's only a specific type of, actually I wouldn't even call those contraception.
I agree.
It's only a specific type of birth control that is genuinely abortifacient.
Correct. And that distinction that you've drawn was brought out, too, in the briefs and the oral argument before the Supreme Court.
Okay. So let's say on Thursday, when this decision comes down, if the Supreme Court decides in favor of Hobby Lobby, what happens next?
Well, I think that allows Hobby Lobby, obviously, to not provide those drugs that it has objected to. And it also would be a statement of a little more far-reaching consequence than that, which would be other private, I think the distinction would be meaningfully drawn, privately owned corporations that would provide them with the same right. There's a group of institutions that are nonprofit, including Biola, who have brought their own lawsuit. But it wouldn't, those are independent of each other, and for various reasons, I don't believe a holding in the Hobby Lobby case would necessarily affect the nonprofit cases.
Okay, we'll come back to that in just a minute. So at present, Hobby Lobby, is my understanding, is that they're being fined every day that they are not in compliance with the Affordable Care Act.
That's my understanding as well.
I take it that if the Supreme Court rules in their favor, those fines will stop effective immediately.
Yes.
I'm not sure either of us knows this for sure, but will they get money back?
You know,
they've been fined. Will those be rescinded?
I don't know that. They could, depending on how the court rules. It really is unknown either way right now.
Okay, so
they've estimated their fines at $1.3 million a day at worst. They're not being fined at that level now, as I understand it, but that's the worst it could be.
I think the important part of that is, I think this underscores the depth of the Greens' religious convictions. That they are, that they're willing to pay these fines as opposed to, bending to the requirements of the Affordable Care Act. So I think it's not, it's not that they have a bias against contraception and don't want to provide it. This has been a very costly battle for them to engage in.
Very. The fines and the legal fees have been extremely costly.
So conversely, if the Supreme Court decides against them, what impact do you think this might have on nonprofit institutions?
I think it probably will not have an impact either way if they win or lose on the nonprofit cases, because it's just a different consideration that's being taken in those cases.
So the difference between a for-profit and a nonprofit organization is that significant to where, I could see where if they decide in favor of Hobby Lobby, that makes the nonprofit's case a little stronger.
Could.
Where the converse, I don't think, is necessarily true.
Agreed.
That if they rule against them, that doesn't necessarily put the nonprofits in a disadvantageous position.
Well, the nonprofits are in a different position because in their case, the government has agreed to an accommodation, which basically says that if as a nonprofit institution you regard yourself as a religious organization and you fill out a very simple, very short form electing that.
It was one page, I think.
Right. Then that's it. You can exercise that exemption, if you will, that they're calling an accommodation. For reasons that frankly are a little difficult to figure out, the government has not been willing to extend that accommodation to for-profit. And the distinction between for-profit and nonprofit in that regard, frankly, eludes me a bit. But that is, in fact, the distinction that has been made. So that what they decide on the Hobby Lobby case, I don't think will have a significant impact on the nonprofits because the whole accommodation issue is present in one type of case and not the other.
You would think that the accommodation being offered to nonprofits would have something to do with a whole plethora of nonprofit organizations being religious organizations. But one of the things that the contraceptive mandate that came with it was this very narrow definition of what constituted a religious organization.
Correct.
Where if that, and this is the part of the decision that I think is the most interesting, but also one with potentially the most harmful consequences to nonprofits, is that they limited the definition of a religious organization to those that basically meet for public worship on Sunday mornings.
Correct.
And so it would, strictly speaking, only churches would qualify as religious organizations, which puts folks like us at Biola outside of the bounds on that. And every Christian, every religious college, all the religious orders of the Catholic Church, all of those
Correct.
would be at risk. So it's a little hard to know why the accommodation was given for nonprofits and not for the for-profits. I agree that the reasoning, I think, eludes us. So I'm not quite sure what to do with that. Hopefully we'll get some clarification on that. But I think what the courts will decide on the nonprofits with all the colleges that have filed similar lawsuits, be very interesting to see what happens to the administration's definition of a religious organization. Because if Christian universities like Biola fall outside of that, then it's not just contraception, but other practices of the university that will come under increasing scrutiny. And that it seems to me is the most potentially far-reaching of all the stuff that will come out of this decision.
Agreed.
Hobby Lobby has a lot of their products that are made in some parts of the world that have pretty dismal records regarding human rights, particularly religious freedom. They make a lot of their stuff's made in China. As you know, China has an abysmal record when it comes to religious freedom, although you could probably make a case that it's getting better. But their record on human rights is nothing to write home about. So what do you say to the person who says, look, if Hobby Lobby, if they cared at all about religious freedom, they'd quit doing business in China? Because it's obvious that they only care about their own religious freedom, not anybody else's. What would you say to that?
I think it's difficult to begin picking at any company. I know there are times when investment companies will find that there is some minor part of an overall investment strategy for a client that involves Planned Parenthood. I hear that from time to time. And how could you possibly invest with that investment company when Planned Parenthood is a part of it? But I think the issue is really, for me anyway, is whether or not someone is complicit in the sin of someone else is the deciding factor of something like that. And at least for me, in terms of the actions that are taking place in China, I think it is too far to go ethically to say, Hobby Lobby, you are complicit in that because of what the government there, not a company, but what the government is doing. I'm curious, same question to you. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think if Hobby Lobby quit doing business in China, that wouldn't, nothing would change. It wouldn't, there's no causal relationship between Hobby Lobby's doing business and the action of the Chinese government with regard to religious freedom. So I think that's right, that the degree to which they are directly involved in the promotion of evil, which is the denial of religious freedom, is really way, way remote.
Pretty tenuous.
It seems to me. And I think the Hobby Lobby, the Greens, it's true. They are concerned ultimately with their religious freedom to practice their own faith as they see fit. And as they see it in what they consider to be an extension of themselves, which is in the company that they founded and still run hands-on today. So I think you can be concerned with religious freedom, of Chinese dissidents, but I would say that's irrelevant to this.
Agreed.
I think they would say, yeah, we're very concerned about that. Mm-hmm. And if it were clear that our doing business in China really made a difference in the religious freedom of whoever is involved there, mm-hmm. I suspect they would find someplace else to do business.
That really isn't the focal point of a Hobby Lobby case. It's not religious freedoms in an abstract, generalized way. It's their own expression of their own religious freedoms under the act that we've been discussing, which is an entirely different subject, as you said, from do we care about other people's religious freedoms in other countries? And I agree. I suspect they do, but it's a complete change of subject, really.
I would call this a red herring.
Mm-hmm.
That is really a distraction to the main point at hand. See, I don't even think that the contraceptive part is really the main issue. The main issue here is the definition of a religious organization. And if it's done narrowly, I think that if that part is upheld, that does not bode well.
You're talking about the nonprofits now.
Right, for nonprofits, yeah.
Right.
And I agree that the Hobby Lobby case really has nothing to do with that.
Mm-hmm.
Because, I think it's one thing to call themselves a Christian company, but they are not claiming to be a religious organization for tax purposes.
Right.
Like nonprofits are.
Correct. Correct. Yeah, I think in terms of the decision, one never knows in advance of the U.S. Supreme Court exactly what they're going to do. I remember all of the predictions about the constitutionality of Obamacare, and you heard pretty much agreement. Mm-hmm. The government will lose this battle. Well, the Supreme Court picked up the idea of the right of the government to tax to basically approve the constitutionality of ACA. And really, neither side even briefed the issue significantly. So you never know what the Supreme Court's going to do. But I think, from my perspective, the best legal argument under the act that we've been talking about, the RFRA, is the second point when I was saying if you're the government and you want to restrict the expression of religious freedom, you have to do it in the least restrictive means possible. And they have a less restrictive means that they could use. They're not using it, and that's the accommodation. And some commentators have said that's going to be difficult for them to argue that they took the least restrictive path, because even less restrictive on the Greens would be to allow them to have the accommodation.
what exactly does the accommodation say? I mean, what does, what is Biola actually agreeing to if we sign the accommodation?
Basically, it says, and there's no test for this, it just states we are a religious organization with religious beliefs. And therefore, because we say we are, we get the right that goes with that to express the fact that we do not want to be participating with the abortion-inducing drugs. Very short form, simple page. So that's what's involved.
Okay. And so my understanding of what happens then, after that accommodation is signed, is that those drugs are still made available to Biola employees. It's just that our insurer is required by the Affordable Care Act to provide those without cost, either to the university or to the employee.
Correct.
Okay. So why wouldn't every nonprofit sign the accommodation? Because I know some have not.
Right.
Why wouldn't every nonprofit just sign that and be done with it?
I think some feel that to give an inch is to give a mile, basically. That they don't want a little accommodation carved out, and in their mind letting someone then attack that legally and find a way around that. They want to pull back from agreeing to any accommodations and saying this entire ACA requirement, the entirety of it, is a violation of the acts we've been discussing. Mm-hmm. I think that the concern, is I have a cup of water here, and you put a little drop of blue dye in it, and it will make everything blue. It's that kind of concern.
So that accommodation reads to some people as compromise.
Yes, I would say so.
Okay.
One of the things that I like about this case, and I like about Hobby Lobby is, and as you know, we teach, you and I, in the Crowell School of Business, where business as ministry is the saying that we use, the motto of the entire organization. And when we teach ethics, we always talk about keeping a place at the table of influence in culture outside. To me, Hobby Lobby is a wonderful example of business as ministry. It is, what makes them such a compelling organization to me is not that they might have Bible studies at noon, or they might have tips about how to evangelize your coworkers, but that their work in and of itself has intrinsic value to the Lord. And they are a company that every aspect of what they do is touched by that. And I like the fact that they're a good example for us to be able to use.
Yeah, that even the products and services they provide, they consider that as part of their ministry too. I think this is a really important case because of the definition of a religious organization. That won't come out of the Hobby Lobby case. That will come out of the nonprofit, the schools cases that are going forward. But I think this will, if Hobby Lobby prevails, I think that bodes well for the nonprofits.
I agree.
In this.
I agree.
But again, I'm not as concerned about the contraceptive mandate as I am about that narrowing of what constitutes a religious organization, because that has huge potential to impact religious freedom in the United States. And I think for 200 plus years, we have prided ourselves on being, as a country, being a bastion of religious freedom and a place of refuge for people who suffer religious persecution around the world. And if anything, the persecution of the church around the world is increasing in some parts of the world rather dramatically. And so I think there has to be some place around the world where religious freedom is taken seriously. And I think that this narrowing of what constitutes a religious organization, I think, is a fairly serious threat to the traditional position of the United States as being a refuge to people who are persecuted for their religious views.
Biola University offers a variety of biblically centered degree programs, ranging from business to ministry to the arts and sciences. Visit biola.edu to find out how Biola could make a difference in your life.